Heart racing, Hope Matthews pressed her back against the rough wooden wall of her father's barn, her breath caught in her throat as she listened to the angry voices outside. It was 1875 in the small town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming Territory, and at 21 years old, she was about to be run out of the only home she'd ever known. "Your daughter has disgraced this family for the last time, Matthews," Mayor Wilkins' voice boomed through the morning air. "That Harper boy is a criminal and a thief. Everyone knows it." Hope squeezed her eyes shut, clutching the small bag of belongings she'd hastily packed. Thomas Harper had seemed so charming, so different from the other young men in town with his slick words and promises of adventure. She'd been blind to the truth until it was too late, until he'd robbed the town bank and tried to convince her to flee with him. She'd refused, but no one believed her innocence. Not after being caught in his embrace behind the church so many times before. "She'll be gone by sundown," her father's defeated voice replied. "I won't have a daughter who brings such shame to my doorstep." Tears streamed down Hope's face. One mistake, loving the wrong man, and everything was lost. Her reputation, her family, her future. The barn door creaked open and Hope startled, hastily wiping away her tears. Her father stood framed in the doorway, his face weathered beyond his 50 years, disappointment etched in every line. "Papa, please," she began. "No." His voice was firm but broken. "You made your choice when you took up with that outlaw. I told you he was no good. The whole town told you." Hope clutched her bag tighter. "I never knew about the robbery. I swear it on Mama's grave." Her father's expression softened for just a moment before hardening again. "Doesn't matter what you knew. What matters is what people believe, and nobody in Redemption Creek believes you anymore." He pulled a small pouch from his pocket and held it out. "Train fare to Cheyenne. I have a cousin there who runs a boarding house. She might take you in, might not. Her address is in there too." Hope reached for the pouch with trembling fingers. "Papa." "You're not welcome back, Hope, not until you've proven yourself worthy of the name Matthews again." He turned away, shoulders slumped. "Stage leaves in an hour, best you're on it." The door closed behind him, leaving Hope alone with her shattered dreams and the weight of a punishment far greater than her crime. An hour later, she sat stiffly on the dusty stagecoach, ignoring the whispers and stares of the other passengers. She kept her eyes fixed on Redemption Creek as it grew smaller in the distance, wondering if she would ever see it again. The journey to Cheyenne was long and uncomfortable, with Hope wedged between a portly businessman and a mother with a fussy infant. By the time they arrived, her dress was wrinkled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, and her spirit nearly broken. Her father's cousin, Mrs. Eleanor Pierce, was a stern-faced woman with iron-gray hair and a disposition to match. She looked Hope up and down with disapproval when she arrived at the boarding house. "So you're James's girl," she said, her lips pursed. "He rode ahead, told me about your indiscretions." Hope flinched. "Mrs. Pierce, save it," the older woman cut her off. "I don't need your excuses. What's done is done. You can stay, but you'll work for your keep. Room and board in exchange for cooking, cleaning, and laundry. And I warn you now, my establishment has a reputation for respectability. One hint of impropriety and you're out." Hope nodded, swallowing her pride. "Thank you, Mrs. Pierce. Rooms at the top of the stairs, last door on the left. Get yourself settled, then come down. Dinner needs preparing and the guests won't wait." The room was tiny, barely fitting a narrow bed and a small dresser. The window overlooked an alley, and the thin curtains did little to block the afternoon sun. Hope unpacked her meager belongings, carefully hanging her 2 dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her mother's hairbrush on the dresser. For 2 months, Hope worked from dawn until well after dusk. Her hands grew raw from scrubbing, her back ached from hauling water and coal, and her feet throbbed from endless hours standing in the kitchen. Mrs. Pierce was a demanding employer, finding fault with everything from Hope's dusting to the way she folded the linens. The boarders were mostly traveling businessmen, most of whom barely noticed Hope except to complain when their coffee wasn't hot enough or their shirts weren't pressed correctly. The few who did notice her either looked at her with pity or with the kind of interest that made her skin crawl. One evening in late September, as Hope was clearing the dinner dishes, Mrs. Pierce approached her with a letter in hand. "This came for you," she said, her expression unreadable, "from Redemption Creek." Hope nearly dropped the stack of plates she was carrying. Setting them down carefully, she reached for the letter with trembling hands. "Thank you. Read it on your own time," Mrs. Pierce said sharply. "There are dishes to be washed." Later that night, alone in her small room, Hope broke the seal on the letter. It was from her father's housekeeper, Mrs. Owens, not her father himself. "Dear Hope," it read, "I write to inform you that your father has taken ill with pneumonia. The doctor says his condition is grave. He asks for you in his fevered state, though he would never admit it when lucid. I thought you should know. Yours sincerely, Mrs. Owens." Hope pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Her father was dying, calling for her, and she had no means to return home and no guarantee she would even be welcome if she did. The next morning, with red-rimmed eyes, Hope approached Mrs. Pierce as she counted the day's earnings. "I need to return to Redemption Creek," she said, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "My father is gravely ill." Mrs. Pierce looked up, her spectacles perched on the end of her nose. "I see, and how do you propose to get there?" "The stage fare isn't cheap." "I've saved a little," Hope admitted. "Not enough, but perhaps you could advance me some wages. I'll return and work it off, I promise." "Return?" Mrs. Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Girl, if you leave now, in the middle of the busy season, don't expect your position to be waiting when you come back. I can replace you before the day is out." Hope's heart sank. "Please, Mrs. Pierce, he's my father." "The same father who cast you out." The older woman shook her head. "You young people, always thinking you can fix everything," she sighed heavily. "I can't advance you money I don't have to spare." Hope nodded, fighting back tears. "I understand, thank you for your time." She turned to leave, her mind racing with impossible options. "Wait, Mrs. Pierce's voice stopped her. "There is one possibility. The cattle drive from the Triple R Ranch arrives tomorrow. They'll be stopping here in Cheyenne before moving on to the railhead. The ranch owner, Samuel Reeves, always stays here when he's in town. He might be heading back toward Redemption Creek after the sale. You could ask him for work or passage." Hope's spirits lifted slightly. "Do you think he would agree?" Mrs. Pierce shrugged. "Samuel's a fair man, if a bit rough around the edges, better than most in his position. Can't hurt to ask." Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I'll give you the day off tomorrow to speak with him when he arrives." "Thank you," Hope whispered, overcome with gratitude. "Don't thank me yet," Mrs. Pierce warned. "Cowboys aren't known for their charity." The next day, Hope wore her best dress, a faded blue calico that had once belonged to her mother. She had mended the frayed cuffs and washed and pressed it carefully. She pinned her hair up neatly and practiced what she would say to this Samuel Reeves a dozen times in the mirror. The cattle drive arrived with the usual commotion shouts of cowboys, the lowing of cattle, and the thunder of hooves as the herd was driven to the holding pens outside of town. By mid-afternoon, the first dusty, trail-worn cowboys began trickling into town, and by evening, the saloons were doing a brisk business. Hope waited nervously in the boarding house parlor, jumping every time the bell over the door rang. Finally, as the grandfather clock struck 7, the door opened to admit a tall figure who removed his hat as he entered, revealing sun-bleached brown hair. "Evening, Aliner," the man called out as he approached the front desk where Mrs. Pierce sat. "Got a room for a tired rancher." "Same as always, Samuel," Mrs. Pierce replied, her usual stern demeanor softening slightly. "How was the drive? Long and dusty, but the herd fetched a good price." He signed the register with a flourish. "Worth every mile." Hope watched from her position by the window, taking the measure of the man. Samuel Reeves looked to be in his early 30s, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who worked alongside his men rather than just giving orders. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the open sky, with laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. He looked tired, with the bone-deep weariness that came from weeks on the trail. Mrs. Pierce caught Hope's eye and beckoned her over. "Samuel, this is Hope Matthews. She's been working for me these past months. Hope, this is Samuel Reeves of the Triple R." Samuel turned, seeming to notice Hope for the first time. His eyes were a startling shade of blue against his tanned skin, and they widened slightly as they took her in. He nodded politely, extending a calloused hand. "Miss Matthews," Hope took his hand, finding his grip firm but gentle. "Mr. Reeves, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Hope has a matter she'd like to discuss with you," Mrs. Pierce said. "Perhaps over dinner." "I've had cook prepare something special, knowing you'd be arriving today." Samuel looked from Mrs. Pierce to Hope, curiosity evident in his expression. "I'd be obliged for a home-cooked meal after weeks of trail food." He smiled then, and the transformation in his face was remarkable. "And for the company, of course." An hour later, Hope sat across from Samuel Reeves in the small private dining room Mrs. Pierce reserved for special guests. The savory aroma of roast beef and potatoes filled the air, and a candle flickered between them, casting dancing shadows on the wallpaper. "Mrs. Pierce says you have something to discuss, Miss Matthews," Samuel said after they had exchanged pleasantries and been served their meal. "I admit I'm curious what business you might have with a rancher you've never met." Hope set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "Mr. Reeves, I understand your ranch is near Redemption Creek." "About a day's ride, yes." He studied her with interest. "You know the area, it's my hometown," Hope admitted. "I left some months ago, but I've received word that my father is gravely ill. I need to return, but I lack the funds for the stage fare." Understanding dawned in Samuel's eyes. "And you're hoping I might offer you passage?" Hope nodded, heat rising to her cheeks. "I know it's presumptuous to ask, but I'm desperate, Mr. Reeves. I'll work for my keep. I can cook for your men on the journey, mend clothes, whatever is needed." Samuel took a sip of his coffee, regarding her thoughtfully. "It's not presumptuous to ask for help when it's needed, Miss Matthews. But I should warn you, traveling with a cattle drive isn't like taking the stage. It's hard, dusty work, even for those not handling the cattle, and my men." He hesitated. "They're good men, but they've been on the trail for weeks without female company." "I understand," Hope said quickly. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Reeves, and as for your men, I can handle myself." A hint of a smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I don't doubt it, Miss Matthews." He set down his cup. "But I'm curious. Mrs. Pierce doesn't usually take on help. How did you come to be working here?" Hope froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. This was the question she'd been dreading. Should she lie? No, she decided. If she was to travel with this man, better to be honest from the start. "I was sent away from Redemption Creek in disgrace," she said quietly, meeting his gaze directly. I fell in love with a man who turned out to be a criminal. Thomas Harper. He robbed the bank and tried to convince me to run away with him. I refused, but no one believed I wasn't involved. My father disowned me and sent me here to his cousin." She waited for the judgment, the disapproval that inevitably followed this confession. To her surprise, Samuel merely nodded. "Thomas Harper," he repeated. "I heard about that robbery. Word travels, even on the range." He studied her face. "For what it's worth, I believe you." Hope blinked in surprise. "You do, but you don't even know me." "I'm a fair judge of character, Miss Matthews. Have to be in my line of work. You've got honest eyes." He leaned back in his chair. "Besides, if you were the type to run off with a bank robber, you wouldn't be working your fingers to the bone for Mrs. Pierce these past months. You'd have found an easier way." Relief washed over Hope, so powerful she nearly wept. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me yet," he said, echoing Mrs. Pierce's earlier warning. "I haven't said I'll take you." "Of course," Hope straightened her shoulders. "What would you need to know to make your decision?" Samuel considered her. "Can you ride?" "Yes. My father raised horses before he took ill." "Can you cook for 20 hungry men?" I've been cooking for Mrs. Pierce's 12 boarders plus staff. I can manage 20. Are you prepared for the discomfort? We'll be sleeping under the stars, moving at dawn with little privacy and less luxury. Hope nodded firmly. Mr. Reeves, I've spent the last month scrubbing floors and hauling coal from dawn to dusk. Luxury is a distant memory. Samuel's expression softened. Very well, Miss Matthews. We leave at first light the day after tomorrow. I'll escort you to Redemption Creek or close enough that you can reach your father's home safely. Hope's eyes filled with tears. I don't know how to thank you. No need, he said, waving away her gratitude, but I do have one condition. Anything, Hope said quickly. The truth, Miss Matthews. No matter what happens on the journey, I expect honesty between us. Can you promise me that? Hope met his gaze steadily. Yes, Mr. Reeves, you have my word. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Mrs. Pierce, surprisingly, helped Hope gather supplies for the journey: a sturdy pair of riding boots from a former boarder, a wide-brimmed hat to protect against the sun, and a wool blanket for the cool nights. You're taking a risk, girl, Mrs. Pierce said as she watched Hope pack her few belongings. Traveling alone with a group of cowboys. Mr. Reeves seems honorable, Hope replied, carefully folding her spare dress. Samuel is honorable, Mrs. Pierce agreed. But he's also a man, and you're a beautiful young woman with a troubled past, she sighed. Just be careful. Don't trade one mistake for another. Hope paused in her packing. I won't. I've learned my lesson about trusting too easily. Mrs. Pierce's expression softened unexpectedly. Perhaps. But don't let one bad experience harden your heart completely. Not all men are like Thomas Harper. Before dawn the next morning, Hope stood outside the boarding house, her small bag at her feet, wrapped in a shawl against the pre-dawn chill. The street was quiet except for the distant sounds of the cattle being readied for the journey home. Samuel Reeves appeared out of the gloom, leading 2 horses, his own tall bay stallion and a gentle-looking dun mare. Morning, Miss Matthews, he said, his voice low in the quiet dawn. Ready for the adventure? Hope nodded, eyeing the mare. Is she mine to ride? For the journey, yes. This is Penny. She's steady and sweet-tempered. She'll take good care of you. He took Hope's bag and secured it behind the saddle. Need a hand up? Hope shook her head, gathering her skirts and mounting with practiced ease. Samuel's eyebrows rose in appreciation. You weren't exaggerating about your riding skills, he commented, swinging onto his own horse. Good, we've got a long way to go. They rode to the edge of town where the cattle and the rest of the hands were waiting. Hope felt the weight of curious stares as they approached, and her cheeks heated under the scrutiny of so many men. Samuel raised his voice. Boys, this is Miss Hope Matthews. She'll be traveling with us back to Redemption Creek, cooking for us along the way. I expect each of you to treat her with the same respect you'd show your own sisters or mothers. There were nods all around, though Hope noticed a few skeptical glances and whispered comments. A wiry older man with a salt and pepper beard rode forward. Miss Matthews, welcome. I'm Charlie Walsh, trail boss when the boss man here is occupied. He tipped his hat. You have any trouble with any of these rascals, you come straight to me or Mr. Reeves. Thank you, Mr. Walsh, Hope replied with a grateful smile. We've got the chuck wagon all set up, Charlie continued. Cookin' supplies and such. Cookie took sick in Cheyenne and couldn't make the return journey, so your arrival is right timely. With that brief introduction complete, Samuel gave the order to move out and the drive began. Hope found herself riding alongside the chuck wagon, driven by a young cowboy who introduced himself as Danny. He couldn't have been more than 18, with freckles across his sunburned face and a shy smile. Cookie usually lets me help with the meals, miss, he told her. I can show you how everything's organized if you like. Hope was grateful for the assistance. The chuck wagon was a marvel of organization, with everything from flour and beans to coffee and dried fruit stored in specific compartments. There was even a Dutch oven for baking, and several cast iron skillets hanging from hooks. The first day of travel was harder than Hope had anticipated. The constant movement of the herd kicked up dust that coated everything, including her throat and eyes. By midday, her thighs ached from hours in the saddle, and when they stopped briefly to water the cattle, she almost couldn't walk when she dismounted. "First day's always the hardest," Samuel said, appearing at her side with a canteen. "Drink. You need to stay ahead of the thirst out here." Hope accepted the water gratefully. "Thank you, I'm fine, truly." Samuel's eyes crinkled at the corners. "No, you're not, but you will be. You're tougher than you look, Miss Matthews." When they made camp that evening, Hope set to work preparing dinner for the men, a hearty stew with the last of the fresh vegetables from Cheyenne, biscuits baked in the Dutch oven, and strong coffee. Despite her exhaustion, she found satisfaction in the appreciative murmurs and empty plates as the cowboys finished their meals. "That was a sight better than Cookie's usual fare," Charlie commented, scraping his plate clean. "No disrespect to the man." Hope smiled, pleased by the compliment. "Thank you, Mr. Walsh." After the meal, as the men sat around the campfire smoking and telling stories, Samuel approached Hope where she was scrubbing the last of the dishes with sand. "You should get some rest," he said. "I've set up your bedroll a bit away from the men, behind that stand of cottonwoods. Should give you some privacy." Hope looked up at him, suddenly realizing she would be sleeping outside under the stars, surrounded by men she barely knew. Samuel seemed to read her thoughts. "I'll be nearby," he assured her. "No one will bother you." "I'm not afraid," Hope said, though her voice wavered slightly. Samuel's expression was kind. "It's all right to be afraid, Miss Matthews. Only fools fear nothing, but you're safe with us, I promise you that." That night, wrapped in her blanket with the vast Wyoming sky spread out above her, Hope thought about Samuel Reeves. He was nothing like Thomas Harper. Where Thomas had been smooth, talking, and flashy, Samuel was straightforward and unassuming. Where Thomas had made grand promises, Samuel offered simple truths. And where Thomas's charm had been a mask for his true nature, Samuel's gruff exterior seemed to hide a genuine kindness. It was dangerous thinking, Hope reminded herself. She was not on this journey to find a new man to trust. She was here to reach her dying father, to make amends if possible. Nothing more. Still, as sleep finally claimed her, it was Samuel's blue eyes that followed her into her dreams. The days fell into a rhythm as they traveled southwest toward Redemption Creek. Hope rose before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the men, then packed up the chuck wagon before mounting Penny for the day's journey. The work was hard, the days long, but Hope found an unexpected peace in the routine. She also found herself drawing closer to Samuel Reeves. He made a point of checking on her throughout each day, bringing her water, asking after her comfort, sharing stories of his ranch and his life. She learned that he had built the Triple R from almost nothing after returning from the war, that his parents had died when he was young, leaving him to make his own way in the world. "Why Triple R?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire after the other men had turned in. "Reeves Ranch and Refuge," he answered, poking at the embers with a stick. "I wanted it to be more than just a cattle operation, wanted it to be a place where people could find safety." He glanced at her. "Sounds foolish, I suppose." "Not at all," Hope said softly. "I think it's admirable." On the fifth day, disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, the lightning and thunder spooking the cattle. Before the cowboys could react, the herd was in full stampede, charging blindly across the prairie. "Hope." Samuel's shout barely carried over the thunder and the pounding of hooves. "Get to the high ground." Now, heart racing, Hope turned Penny toward a rocky outcropping, urging the mare to a gallop. Rain lashed at her face, nearly blinding her as she rode. Behind her, she could hear the shouts of the cowboys trying to control the stampede, the bellowing of terrified cattle and the crash of thunder. Penny scrambled up the slope, her hooves slipping on wet rocks. When they reached the relative safety of the outcropping, Hope turned to look back at the chaos below. Through the curtain of rain, she could make out the cowboys racing alongside the stampeding herd, trying to turn the leaders. Samuel was at the front, his hat gone, hair plastered to his head, riding fearlessly into the midst of the panicked cattle. Hope watched in horror as Samuel's horse stumbled, pitching him forward. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought he would fall beneath the hooves of the cattle, but he somehow managed to right himself in the saddle and continue. Gradually, the cowboys managed to turn the herd, slowing the stampede to a trot and finally bringing the cattle under control. When the immediate danger had passed, Hope urged Penny back down the slope to the now muddy flat where the men were regrouping. "Anyone hurt?" she heard Charlie calling over the diminishing rain. There were shouts back, mostly reassurances, though one young cowboy had been thrown and was nursing a sprained wrist. Hope searched frantically for Samuel, finally spotting him dismounting slowly from his exhausted horse. Without thinking, she rode directly to him, sliding from Penny's back as soon as she was close enough. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice trembling. Samuel looked up, surprise crossing his features at her obvious concern. "I'm fine, Miss Matthews, just a few bruises." His expression softened as he took in her bedraggled appearance. "What about you? You got to safety in time?" Hope nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look soaked to the skin, hair plastered to her face, dress mudded and clinging to her body. Self-consciously, she tried to smooth her skirts. "You did well," Samuel said quietly. "Kept your head in a crisis, not everyone would have." "I was terrified," she admitted. "Being brave isn't about not being afraid," he replied, his blue eyes serious. "It's about doing what needs doing despite the fear." The storm had scattered their supplies, overturned the chuck wagon, and generally created a mess of their camp. The remainder of the day was spent retrieving what could be saved, rounding up the last of the strays, and setting up a makeshift camp for the night. Hope worked alongside the men, too busy to worry about her appearance or propriety. When darkness fell, they were all exhausted, muddy, and hungry. The best she could manage for dinner was beans and hardtack, the Dutch oven having been lost in the chaos. "I'm sorry about the meal," she apologized as she handed Samuel his plate. "Don't be," he said firmly. "We're all alive, the herd is mostly intact, and we have food in our bellies. That's victory enough for today." Later, as Hope prepared for sleep in her sodden bedroll, Samuel approached with a bundle in his arms. "It's my spare shirt and trousers," he said, holding them out. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. You can't sleep in those wet clothes, you'll catch your death." Hope hesitated, looking at the men's clothing. "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will," Samuel interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "There's no one to judge out here, Miss Matthews, and your health is more important than propriety." Finally, Hope accepted the bundle. "Thank you." "I'll stand guard while you change," he offered, turning his back. "Just to ensure your privacy." Behind the shelter of a boulder, Hope peeled off her sodden dress and petticoats, wringing them out as best she could before pulling on Samuel's shirt. It enveloped her, the sleeves hanging well past her hands, the collar gaping at her neck. The trousers were even more problematic, requiring her to roll the waistband several times and the cuffs even more. But they were blissfully dry, and she immediately felt warmer. "I must look ridiculous," she said, stepping out from behind the boulder. Samuel turned, and the expression that crossed his face was not one of amusement but something else entirely, something that made Hope's heart skip a beat. "Not ridiculous," he said softly. "Just different." He cleared his throat. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow will be another long day." As Hope settled into her bedroll, she was acutely aware of Samuel's scent surrounding her, leather and pine, and something uniquely him. It was comforting in a way she hadn't expected, and despite the hard ground and the lingering chill, she fell asleep almost instantly. The next day dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Hope rose early, changing back into her now dry dress before anyone else was awake. She folded Samuel's clothes neatly and left them by his bedroll with a whispered "thank you" when she went to stoke the fire for breakfast. As they continued their journey, Hope found herself watching Samuel more often, noticing the way the sun caught in his hair, the strength in his hands as he handled his horse, the kindness in his interactions with his men. She told herself it was merely gratitude for his assistance, but in her heart, she knew it was something more. They were 2 days out from Redemption Creek when Hope finally gathered her courage to ask the question that had been troubling her since they'd left Cheyenne. "Mr. Reeves," she began as they rode side by side a little apart from the others. "May I ask you something personal?" Samuel glanced at her curiously. "Of course. Why did you agree to take me with you? You could have refused, most men would have." Samuel was quiet for so long that Hope thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "When I was 19, I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I trusted the wrong person and it cost lives, not mine but others, good men who followed my lead." He looked straight ahead, his profile strong against the sky. "I know what it's like to be judged for one mistake, to carry that burden. When you told me your story, I saw someone deserving of a second chance." He turned to her then, his blue eyes earnest. "Everyone deserves that, Miss Matthews. Even you. Especially you." Hope's throat tightened with emotion. "And if I told you I was afraid I'd never get that chance in Redemption Creek, that no matter what I do, they'll always see me as the girl who loved an outlaw." "Then I'd say Redemption Creek doesn't deserve you," Samuel replied simply. "And that there are other places where a person can start fresh." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. As they made camp that evening, Hope found herself pondering Samuel's words. Could she start fresh somewhere else if Redemption Creek rejected her again? Would she even want to return to her father's house if he didn't truly want her there? These thoughts were still troubling her the next morning as they broke camp. They were making good time, Samuel told her, and would reach the vicinity of Redemption Creek by nightfall. "You're quiet today," Samuel observed as they rode. Hope managed a small smile. "Just thinking about what awaits me in Redemption Creek. Second thoughts, some," she admitted. "But I need to know if my father is all right. I need to try at least." Samuel nodded in understanding. "Family is complicated, believe me, I know," he hesitated. "Hope, whatever happens in Redemption Creek, know that you have options. You don't have to stay if it's not right." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips sent a warmth through her that had nothing to do with the summer sun. "Thank you, Samuel," she replied softly, using his name in return. The look he gave her then was so full of unspoken feeling that Hope had to glance away, her cheeks flushing. That afternoon, as they stopped to water the horses by a small creek, Hope was helping Danny refill the water barrels when a movement in the trees caught her eye. Before she could react, 5 men on horseback burst from the tree line, guns drawn. "Nobody move," the leader shouted, a bandana covering the lower half of his face. "This is a holdup." Hope froze, the water bucket slipping from her nerveless fingers. The cowboys were scattered, most of them with the herd 100 yards away. Only she, Danny, and 2 others were by the creek, with Samuel a short distance off checking a lame horse. "We don't want trouble," one of the other cowboys called out, raising his hands slowly. "Take what you want." "Smart man," the bandit leader said with a chuckle. "We'll be taking your cattle and whatever cash you're carrying from that sale in Cheyenne." Hope's heart pounded in her chest. These men must have been tracking them, waiting for an opportunity to strike when the herd was vulnerable and the men separated. "The lady, too," another bandit said, eyeing Hope with a look that made her skin crawl. "She'll fetch a good price south of the border." "No," Danny said, stepping in front of Hope. "You leave her be." "Danny, don't," Hope whispered urgently. The leader laughed. "Ain't you sweet boy, protecting your lady friend?" He raised his gun. "Step aside before I put a hole in you." "I think you boys have made a serious mistake," Samuel's voice rang out from behind them. He had circled around and now stood with his rifle aimed squarely at the leader's back. "Drop your weapons." The bandits whirled in surprise, but their leader kept his gun trained on Danny. "You drop yours, mister, or the boy gets it." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Samuel lowered his rifle slightly. "Let's all stay calm here. No need for anyone to get hurt." "Throw the rifle away," the leader demanded. Samuel hesitated, then tossed the rifle aside. Now let the boy and the lady go, they're no threat to you. The leader seemed to consider this, then jerked his head at one of his men. Tie 'em up, all of 'em, we'll take the cattle and be gone before the rest of their outfit knows what happened. As one of the bandits dismounted and began pulling rope from his saddlebag, Hope caught Samuel's eye. He gave her the slightest nod, a signal. For what, she wasn't sure, but she trusted him. The bandit approached Danny first, roughly pulling his hands behind his back. As he moved toward Hope, Samuel suddenly launched himself forward, tackling the leader from his horse. The man's gun discharged harmlessly into the air as they crashed to the ground. In the chaos that followed, Hope didn't think she acted. Grabbing the water bucket, she swung it with all her might at the nearest bandit, catching him in the side of the head. He toppled from his horse with a cry of pain. Danny and the other cowboys seized the opportunity, diving for cover and drawing their own weapons. Gunfire erupted, bullets whizzing through the air. Hope dropped to the ground, crawling behind a boulder as the bandits returned fire. Through gaps in the gunsmoke, she could see Samuel wrestling with the leader, both men fighting for control of the bandit's pistol. With a desperate surge of strength, Samuel wrenched the gun away and slammed the butt of it into the man's temple, rendering him unconscious. The firefight was brief but intense. When it was over, 2 of the bandits lay dead, one was unconscious, and the other 2 had fled into the trees. Hope. Samuel's voice called urgently. "Hope, where are you? Are you hurt?" "Here," she called back, rising shakily from behind the boulder. "I'm not hurt." Samuel strode toward her, his face tight with concern. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Thank God," he murmured against her hair. "When the shooting started, I thought—" Hope clung to him, her body trembling with delayed shock. "I'm all right," she assured him. "But Danny—" They turned together to find the young cowboy sitting on the ground, clutching his arm where a bullet had grazed him. One of the other men was already tending to the wound. "It's just a scratch," Danny called over, his face pale but determined. "Don't you worry about me, Miss Hope." The commotion had attracted the attention of the rest of the outfit, who came galloping over the rise, led by Charlie. They quickly secured the surviving bandits and assessed the damage. "You were mighty brave, Miss Matthews," Charlie said later as they prepared to move on. "Most women would have fainted dead away." Hope shook her head. "I was terrified, Mr. Walsh, but I couldn't just stand by and do nothing." "That's what makes it brave," Samuel said, coming to stand beside her. His hand found hers, squeezing gently. "You're the most courageous woman I've ever known, Hope Matthews." The way he looked at her then left no doubt in Hope's mind about his feelings, and to her surprise, she realized she felt the same. In the space of a few short weeks, Samuel Reeves had shown her what a good, honorable man truly was, not with flowery words or grand gestures, but with consistent kindness, respect, and integrity. But there was still her father to consider, still the matter of Redemption Creek and the judgment that awaited her there. Hope gently withdrew her hand from Samuel's. "We should move on," she said softly, "if we're to reach Redemption Creek by nightfall." Samuel studied her face, then nodded. "As you wish." As the sun began to set, painting the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson, Hope felt her anxiety mounting. They were close now, perhaps an hour from the outskirts of Redemption Creek. Soon she would face her past, confront the judgment of those who had cast her out, and learn whether her father still lived. Samuel rode beside her, a silent, supportive presence. Occasionally their eyes would meet, and in his gaze Hope found strength. "There's a fork in the trail ahead," Samuel said as they crested a rise. "The main herd will continue on to Triple R, but I'll escort you and a couple of the men to Redemption Creek." Hope nodded, her throat too tight for words. As they approached the fork, a lone rider came galloping toward them from the direction of town. Hope tensed, wondering if it was someone sent to turn her away before she even arrived. The rider drew closer, and Hope recognized Mrs. Owens's eldest son, Peter. He reined in his horse when he spotted them, his expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "Miss Hope," he called out. We've been watching for you since Mother sent the letter, didn't know if you'd come, Hope urged Penny forward. Peter, how is my father? Peter's face grew solemn. Still living, miss, but only just. Doc says it's a matter of days now. He's been asking for you. He has. Hope couldn't keep the shock from her voice. Yes, miss, been calling your name something fierce these past few nights. Peter glanced curiously at Samuel and the cowboys. You've come with quite an escort. Mr. Reeves kindly offered me passage from Cheyenne, Hope explained. I had no other way to reach home. Peter nodded. Well, we'd best hurry if you want to see your father while he's still lucid. He has good moments and bad. As they rode toward town, Hope felt a growing dread. What would the townspeople say when they saw her? Would they turn her away? Would her father truly want to see her, or was it just the fever talking? Samuel must have sensed her fears, for he rode closer, his presence reassuring. Whatever happens, he said quietly, remember you're not alone anymore. The words warmed her heart, giving her courage as they approached the familiar buildings of Redemption Creek. It was early evening, and the main street was relatively quiet. Still, heads turned as they passed, and Hope could hear the whispers starting. That's Hope Matthews. Thought she was gone for good. What's she doing with Sam Reeves? Hope kept her chin up, refusing to show shame. Samuel rode tall beside her, his expression daring anyone to speak directly against her. They reached her father's house on the edge of town, a modest two-story home with a wide front porch where Hope had spent countless evenings watching the sunset. It looked smaller than she remembered and in need of paint. The garden her mother had lovingly tended was overgrown with weeds. Peter helped Hope dismount, while Samuel and his men remained on their horses. I'll wait here, Samuel said. Take whatever time you need. Hope nodded gratefully, then turned toward the house, her heart pounding. Mrs. Owens opened the door before she reached it, her round face lined with worry. Oh, Miss Hope, she said, pulling Hope into a quick embrace. Thank the Lord you've come. He's upstairs in his room. Hope swallowed hard. How is he truly? Mrs. Owens's eyes filled with tears. Fading, miss. The pneumonia's in both lungs now. He's been holding on by sheer stubbornness, I think, waiting for you. Hope climbed the familiar stairs, each step heavier than the last. The door to her father's bedroom stood ajar, and she could hear labored breathing from within. Steeling herself, she pushed the door open. The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp. Her father lay in the large bed that had once belonged to both her parents, his once robust frame shrunken and frail beneath the quilts. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. Papa, Hope whispered, moving to the bedside. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever and confusion. For a moment he didn't seem to recognize her, then clarity dawned. Hope. His voice was barely audible, a dry rasp. Is it really you? Yes, Papa. Hope took his hand, shocked at how thin and cool it felt. I came as soon as I heard you were ill, my girl. Tears leaked from the corners of his eyes. My Hope, I was so wrong. Can you ever forgive an old fool? Hope's own tears spilled over. There's nothing to forgive, Papa. I should have listened to you about Thomas. You were right about him. Her father shook his head weakly. No. I was right about him, but wrong about you, wrong to cast you out, wrong to believe you could be anything but good. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had. I've missed you every day. I've missed you too, Hope said, her voice breaking. Mrs. Owens, her father called, his voice surprisingly strong for a moment. The box. Mrs. Owens, who had been hovering in the doorway, stepped forward with a small wooden box. Here, Mr. Matthews, he gestured for Hope to take it. Your mother's things. Her jewelry, her letters, they should be yours. I should never have kept them from you. Hope accepted the box, cradling it against her chest. Thank you, Papa. There's something else, he said, his breathing becoming more labored. The deed to the house and land, it's in my desk, all yours now, do with it what you will. Papa, don't talk like that, you'll get better, and no, child. He shook his head again. My time is coming, I can feel it, but I couldn't go without seeing you again, without telling you. A coughing fit overtook him, and Mrs. Owens quickly helped him sip some water. When he could speak again, his voice was weaker. Without telling you how proud I am of you, how much I love you. I love you too, Papa, Hope whispered, her tears falling freely now. Who brought you home? He asked suddenly. Herd horses. Samuel Reeves from the Triple R Ranch, Hope answered. He gave me passage from Cheyenne when I had nowhere else to turn. A ghost of a smile touched her father's lips. Sam Reeves, good man, known him for years. His eyes searched her face. He looks at you special. Hope blushed despite herself. Papa, tell me the truth, girl, no time for beating around the bush. Yes, Hope admitted, I believe he does. And you feel the same? Hope hesitated, then nodded. I think I might. Good, her father said with satisfaction. Better than that Harper boy. Reeves has substance. He closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. Bring him in, want to see him. Hope looked uncertainly at Mrs. Owens, who nodded encouragingly. I'll fetch him, miss. A few minutes later, Samuel's boots sounded on the stairs. He entered the room hesitantly, hat in hand, his tall frame seeming too large for the small bedroom. Mr. Matthews, he said respectfully, approaching the bed, it's good to see you, sir. Hope's father opened his eyes again. Sam Reeves, you brought my daughter home. Yes, sir, it was my honor. Man of honor, always were. Her father's breathing was becoming more labored, but he pressed on. Need to ask you something? Samuel glanced at Hope, then back to her father. Anything, sir, my Hope. She needs someone who'll stand by her, someone who sees her true worth. He coughed again, the sound rattling in his chest. Will you be that man, Sam Reeves? Samuel's eyes widened at the directness of the question. He looked at Hope, and in that moment, everything between them was laid bare. If she'll have me, he said simply. Yes, I will. Hope's father nodded, satisfied. Good, that's good. His eyes drifted shut again. Tired now, need to rest. We'll let you sleep, Papa, Hope said, gently kissing his forehead. Outside in the hallway, Hope turned to Samuel, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. I'm sorry. He's not himself. The fever makes him speak plainly. Don't apologize, Samuel said, taking her hands in his. He asked the question I've been wanting to ask since the day of the stampede. He drew a deep breath. I know it's sudden, Hope. I know you have your father to care for and decisions to make about your future. But I meant what I said in there. If you'll have me, I want to be the man who stands by you for the rest of our days. Hope looked up into his earnest blue eyes, seeing all the things that made Samuel Reeves different from Thomas Harper: the steadiness, the integrity, the genuine care for others that formed the core of who he was. Samuel, she began, her voice trembling with emotion. A cry from Mrs. Owens interrupted her. Miss Hope, come quick. They rushed back into the bedroom to find Hope's father gasping for breath, his face ashen. The doctor, who must have arrived while they were in the hall, was bent over him with a stethoscope. Papa, Hope cried, hurrying to the bedside. For the next few hours, Hope barely left her father's side as he fought for each breath. The doctor did what he could to ease his suffering, but it was clear the end was near. Samuel remained as well, a quiet, supportive presence. He fetched water, stoked the fire when the night grew cool, and simply held Hope's hand when there was nothing else to be done. Just before dawn, James Matthews drew his final breath, his daughter's hand clasped in his. Love you, Hope, were his last words, barely audible but unmistakable. I love you too, Papa, Hope whispered as his eyes closed for the last time. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief and arrangements. The funeral was well attended, surprising Hope with how many of the townspeople came to pay their respects. Some even approached her afterward, offering condolences and cautious welcomes back to Redemption Creek. Mayor Wilkins, who had been among those most vocal in condemning her, actually apologized. We were too harsh, Miss Matthews, he admitted gruffly. And it seems we were wrong about your involvement with Harper. He was caught in Denver last month and confessed you knew nothing about the robbery. Hope accepted the apology with as much grace as she could muster, though privately she thought it came too late to matter. Her father was gone, and the town's judgment had cost them precious time together. Through it all, Samuel stayed. He postponed his return to Triple R, sending most of his men ahead with the herd but remaining in Redemption Creek with Charlie and a couple of others. He helped Hope with the practical matters, the legal paperwork, the sorting of her father's affairs, the decisions about the house and land. "You don't have to stay," Hope told him one evening as they sat on the front porch after a long day of sorting through her father's belongings. "Your ranch needs you. Charlie's handling things," Samuel replied, "and I'm exactly where I need to be." Hope looked out at the sunset painting the distant mountains gold. "I've been thinking about what to do with the house. I can't imagine living here alone with all the memories." "What are you considering?" Samuel asked carefully. "Selling it, perhaps, starting fresh somewhere else." She glanced at him. "We never finished our conversation that day in the hallway." Samuel took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "No, we didn't." "You asked if I would have you," Hope said softly. "If I would let you be the man who stands by me." "And I meant every word," Samuel assured her. Hope turned to face him fully. "When I left Redemption Creek in disgrace, I thought I'd made the biggest mistake of my life by trusting the wrong man. I felt I deserved the punishment of exile." She squeezed his hand. "But now I see it differently. If I hadn't been sent away, I never would have met you. Never would have discovered what real love looks like, not flashy promises and stolen kisses, but steadfast support, unwavering respect, and quiet strength." Samuel's eyes were bright with emotion. "Hope Matthews, are you saying yes?" "I'm saying yes," Hope confirmed, her heart full. "Yes, I'll have you, Samuel Reeves. Yes, I want to be the woman who stands by you for all our days." With infinite tenderness, Samuel cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was nothing like Thomas Harper's passionate but ultimately hollow kisses. This was a promise, a covenant, a beginning. When they finally parted, Samuel pressed his forehead to hers. "I don't have a ring yet," he apologized. Hope smiled. "I don't need a ring, I just need you." "Nevertheless, you'll have both," he promised, "and a home at R if that's what you want. Or we can stay here or go somewhere else entirely. Wherever you'll be happiest." Hope considered this. I think I'd like to see R, to see this refuge you've built. And perhaps we could use the money from selling this house to expand it, to make it a true haven for others who need a second chance." Samuel's face lit up. "I can think of nothing I'd like more." 2 weeks later, Hope Matthews stood on the porch of her childhood home for the last time. The house had sold quickly to a young family new to Redemption Creek, and Hope was satisfied knowing that children would once again fill the rooms with laughter. Mrs. Owens had agreed to stay on with the new family, ensuring continuity for everyone. She hugged Hope tightly as they said their goodbyes. "Your mother would be so proud of you," the housekeeper whispered, "and your father too, finding happiness after such sorrow." Hope blinked back tears. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Owens, for caring for him and for sending that letter." "Be happy, child," Mrs. Owens said, patting her cheek. "That's all that matters now." Samuel waited by the wagon, which was loaded with Hope's belongings and the keepsakes she'd chosen to take from her parents' home. He helped her up to the seat, his hand lingering on hers. "Ready?" he asked. Hope looked back at the house one last time, then turned to face the future and the man before her. "Ready." The journey to R took most of the day, and as they crested the final rise, Hope caught her breath at the vista below. The ranch sprawled across a verdant valley, with the main house and outbuildings nestled against a backdrop of pine-covered hills. Cattle grazed in the distance, and a creek wound like a silver ribbon through the property. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Samuel's expression was a mixture of pride and humility. "It's taken years to build, started with just that cabin there." He pointed to a small structure near the creek. "Now we run over 2,000 head of cattle, and I employ 15 men year-round, more during roundup." As they approached, several cowboys rode out to meet them, including Charlie, who grinned broadly at the sight of Hope beside Samuel. "Welcome to R, Miss Matthews," he called. "Or should I be saying Mrs. Reeves soon?" Hope blushed, but Samuel answered proudly. 2 weeks from Sunday, Charlie, and you'd better have your best shirt pressed for the occasion." The main house was larger than Hope had expected, built of sturdy logs with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. "It's not fancy," Samuel said as he showed her around, "but it's solid, built to last." "Like its owner," Hope replied with a smile. Samuel showed her to what would be her room until their wedding across the hall from his own. "I know it's not what you're used to," he began. Hope stopped him with a gentle hand on his arm. "It's perfect, Samuel, truly." She looked around at the clean, simple room with its handmade quilt and curtains that matched the wildflowers outside. "It already feels like home." In the 2 weeks that followed, Hope threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life. She worked alongside Mrs. Perkins, the elderly woman who had been cooking for the ranch hands, learning her recipes and routines. She explored the property on horseback with Samuel, marveling at the beauty of the land that would soon be her home too. And in the evenings, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, talking of their plans for the future. Hope suggested using part of the money from her father's house to build a school for the children of the ranch hands and neighboring homesteads. Samuel thought it was a brilliant idea. "We could hire a teacher," he said enthusiastically. "Maybe even add rooms for her to board orphans or children who live too far to travel daily." "A true refuge," Hope said, squeezing his hand. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. Charlie had ridden to town the day before to fetch the minister, and Mrs. Perkins had outdone herself preparing a feast for the celebration. Hope dressed in her mother's wedding gown, which Mrs. Owens had altered and sent along as a wedding gift. It was simple ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, perfectly suited to a ranch wedding. Her mother's pearl earrings completed the ensemble. Samuel waited for her beneath an arch of wildflowers that the ranch hands had constructed near the creek. When Hope appeared, walking alone toward him, his face transformed with such joy that tears sprang to her eyes. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. They exchanged vows and rings. Samuel had ridden all the way to Cheyenne to find a gold band worthy of his bride before a gathering of ranch hands, neighbors, and even a few faces from Redemption Creek, including Mrs. Owens and Peter. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Samuel's kiss was both tender and promising, sealing their covenant before God and their community. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with fiddle music, dancing, and more food than even the hungry cowboys could consume. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same gold and crimson hues as the day Hope had first approached Redemption Creek with Samuel, the newlyweds slipped away from the festivities. Hand in hand, they walked to the small rise overlooking the ranch, where Samuel had proposed properly the day after they'd arrived at R. "Happy, Mrs. Reeves?" Samuel asked, drawing her into his arms. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Hope answered truthfully. "A year ago, I thought my life was over. I thought loving the wrong man had ruined me forever." "And now," Samuel prompted, brushing a strand of hair from her face, Hope smiled up at her husband, her heart full to bursting. "Now I know that loving the right man has given me a new beginning. A refuge. A home." Samuel kissed her then, as the last light of day gilded them in its warm glow, two souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed: second chances, unconditional acceptance, and a love that was right and true. 5 years later, Hope Reeves stood on the porch of the R ranch house, watching as her husband led their 3-year-old daughter on her first pony ride. Little Sarah's delighted giggles carried across the yard, matched by the proud smile on Samuel's face as he guided the gentle pony in a circle. "Not too fast, Samuel," Hope called, though she knew her caution was unnecessary. Samuel was as careful with their daughter as he was with all precious things. "She's a natural, Hope," he called back. Just like her mother, Hope smiled, resting one hand on her swollen belly where their second child, a boy, she was certain would arrive in just a few months. Beside her, Mrs. Perkins placed a glass of lemonade on the small table. Little Sarah's fearless, just like you were when you first came here, the older woman commented. Jumping right into ranch life like you were born to it. Hope laughed. I was terrified, Mrs. Perkins, I just hid it well. Well, you've certainly bloomed here, Mrs. Perkins said approvingly. The school, the orphanage, this family you and Samuel have built, it's all just as it should be. Hope had to agree. The Triple R had indeed become the refuge Samuel had always envisioned. The school they'd built now served 20 children from the ranch and surrounding homesteads, with a dedicated teacher who also supervised the 5 orphans currently living in the adjacent dormitory. 3 of those orphans had been rescued from a failed wagon train the previous winter, their parents lost to fever. The oldest, a 12-year-old boy named Michael, now shadowed Samuel whenever possible, learning the ranching business with eager attention. Mrs. Reeves. Charlie's voice interrupted her thoughts as he rode up to the house. Now the official foreman of Triple R, Charlie still retained his cheerful nature despite the added responsibilities. Letter came for you from Redemption Creek. Hope accepted the envelope, recognizing Mrs. Owens's handwriting. The housekeeper still wrote regularly, keeping Hope informed of the goings-on in her former hometown. Thank you, Charlie, she said. Will you stay for supper? Mrs. Perkins made apple pie. Wouldn't miss it, Charlie grinned, tipping his hat before heading to the stables. Hope opened the letter, smiling as she read Mrs. Owens's news. The town was prospering, with a new hotel being built on Main Street. Peter had married the schoolteacher, and they were expecting their first child. And most surprisingly, Thomas Harper had been released from prison and had returned to Redemption Creek, apparently reformed and working as a clerk in the general store. Once, the mention of Thomas's name would have brought pain or at least discomfort. Now, Hope felt only a vague curiosity and a hope that he had indeed found a better path. Her life had moved so far beyond that chapter that it seemed almost to belong to someone else. Samuel came up the porch steps, carrying a tired but happy Sarah. Someone's ready for her nap, he said, passing their daughter to Hope. She rode all the way to the creek and back. Such a big girl, Hope murmured, kissing Sarah's rosy cheek. Let's get you settled, sweetheart. After tucking Sarah into her small bed, Hope returned to find Samuel on the porch, gazing out at the land that had become their shared passion. Charlie says the north pasture is ready for the herd, he said as she joined him. The grass is knee-high after those spring rains. That's wonderful, Hope replied, slipping her hand into his. And the new well is working perfectly. Mrs. Perkins says she's never had such sweet water for cooking. Samuel turned to face her, his blue eyes as clear and honest as the day they'd met. I got a letter today, too. From the territorial governor. He's appointed me to the committee overseeing land grants for new settlers. Hope's eyes widened. Samuel, that's a great honor. It means more travel, he cautioned. Denver, occasionally Cheyenne. I told him I'd need to discuss it with my wife before accepting. Of course you should accept, Hope said without hesitation. Your experience will be invaluable to those new settlers. And we can manage here. Charlie's more than capable, and I've been running this ranch alongside you for 5 years now. Samuel's expression softened with pride and love. You have indeed, Mrs. Reeves, better than I ever could have imagined. He placed his hand gently on her belly. Are you sure it won't be too much with the new baby coming? Hope covered his hand with her own. We'll make it work just as we always have, together. Samuel pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't been sent away from Redemption Creek? If you hadn't been on that stage to Cheyenne the same day our cattle drive arrived? Hope considered this, resting her head against his chest. Sometimes. But then I remember what you told me once, that everyone deserves a second chance. She looked up at him, her heart full of gratitude for the life they'd built. What seemed like punishment turned out to be the greatest blessing of my life. For both of us, Samuel agreed, kissing her tenderly. I thought I was rescuing a damsel in distress, but you ended up saving me just as much. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the ranch in hues of gold and amber. Hope reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the shame and heartbreak of loving the wrong man to the joy and fulfillment of a love that was right and true, every step had led her home to this land, this purpose, this man. Samuel's arm tightened around her waist. "What are you thinking about with that secret smile?" Hope leaned into his embrace, savoring the security and belonging she had found in his love. Just that sometimes, what looks like the end of the road is really just the beginning of a much better one. "Amen to that, Mrs. Reeves," Samuel murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Amen to that." Together they watched as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, their light a reminder of promises kept and dreams fulfilled, and of a love that had transformed punishment into redemption, exile into homecoming, and two solitary hearts into one unbreakable family.